Hello, so I'm Elizabeth,
I'm Maeve.
and we're going to talk to you today about some presentation techniques. So we have a whole nother video where we walk you through some presentation tools. So this time we're just going to talk to you about different techniques.
Yes.
So first thing that you should always consider when you're preparing a presentation of any kind is actually your audience. So your audience, depending on who they are, will be sort of the focus of your planning. So as you plan, you have to make sure that you're not talking down to them or talking over their heads. You want to make sure that if you're, for example, presenting for a course, that you are talking using the vocabulary that you used in the rest of the course. If you're talking in a presentation for a conference, that you pay attention to what the whole conference is about and what your individual panel or the actual group that you'll be talking to has come to the room interested in. So for example, if you're at a conference about, say, for example, the Society of Biblical Literature, then you can assume that the people that are there have at least a passing familiarity with most techniques associated with the Bible. But if you're going to bring in some social science, you may need to familiarize them with the particular technique you're using. However, if you're in a panel that's specializing in social science and the Bible, then you wouldn't need to maybe go into quite as much detail. You could go deeper into your subject. So that's audience. But also, we need to think about design. So in general, I want you to choose a good aesthetic. Make sure that your design aesthetic for your whole presentation is clean and orderly. Also trust templates. If you're using a visual presentation, make sure you trust the template and don't sort of go too far off book for most of them. Also choose fewer slides than you think, okay? You don't want to be transitioning every 5 seconds with your audience. That kind of makes people get distracted very easily. You want to make sure that you give your audience time to read what you have or consider the image that you've given them on the screen. What I like to tell people is kill your darlings. If you think that you need 30 slides, cut it down to 15, and I almost guarantee that it will be a better presentation.
Definitely. While we're talking about cutting back words, you also don't need as many words as you think. If you really need to, go ahead and type everything out and then just edit it until you have, just your main points on there. And that way you can elaborate on those main points instead of having your audience read exactly what you're saying and following along. Exactly. Another thing to consider with words are fancy fonts. These top 2 examples are kind of okay, and then we get into this yellow on purple, which, isn't really appealing, and then we have this like pink on purple, which is kind of really hard to read. Mm-hmm. So it's just something to consider. If your audience can't read what you're talking about, might be a bit of a problem. Another thing to consider are pictures. Just make sure they're on topic, not too distracting, and don't have too many as well. As long as they're a good visual representation of what you're trying to present, they're probably good to have in your presentation. And then transitions. So we're using Prezi to kind of walk you through a presentation. It has one type of transition, but in PowerPoint and slides, there are tons of transitions. And as fun as checkerboard and fade may be, if you have them on every single slide, it can, 1, slow down your computer, and 2, can kind of cause a bit of a headache.
That's right. And when your computer slows down, it can make you a much more nervous presenter too, so that can be a problem.
Yes.
So also when doing your presentations, you of course need to consider citations. So make sure you're crediting your sources appropriately. One way to do this is to create a bibliography slide. So that means at the end of your presentation, you actually just have a slide that has all of your citations noted, or maybe in a sort of footnote or endnote style. You can also have a list of the works that you cite in the presentation that you maybe pass out, like a actual printed list. That can be useful if you know you're going to have access to do that. But say, for example, I would favor keeping the credit in the actual slides if you were going to say send the presentation to someone else or turn it in just using a sort of online means, right? So just make sure that however you get your citation there, that it always follows along with your presentation. Another thing to consider is using the medium, so having direct links or URLs actually in your presentation. So for example, we give credit to the picture we used earlier using the actual link so that the people who have this slide can go to this website. Now, the thing to keep in mind with all of this is to keep it appropriate to the use. So there are certain times when citation will be more or less useful or more or less necessary for particular things. But the most important thing is to make sure that you're never plagiarizing and they're always giving credit to your sources. I just want to impress that on everybody. It works in presentations as well as papers.
And then real quick, another thing that's nice about having a slide with your bibliography on it is if you are presenting to, or just whoever you're presenting to, they can go back and look at what you were looking at. Maybe they're more interested in other parts of that article that you pulled a quote from, or, the pictures that we just had. Maybe people want to see the other pictures that are available on the website. So it's just good for your audience to have those links as well.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So one of the things you want to give your audience when you're giving a presentation is not just your own ideas, but also make sure that you're when you're introducing them to a topic, that you give them good references for other things that you're doing. So that's part of the gift that you give an audience when you give a presentation.
Great.
Oh, and finally, there's embedding video and sound. Now, Prezi gives us the option to embed things like this YouTube video, which I will briefly show to you. But you want to be very cautious with this kind of thing. When you embed video and sound, it means that, especially with sound, it means that you're going to have to research what kind of audiovisual hookups you'll have available to you. Now, usually visuals are fairly simple. Almost everything, although you certainly want to check with wherever you're presenting that you'll have the right equipment, but almost everywhere has a decent way to project images. However, video can be more complicated. Again, it requires more memory. For this video, for example, we have to be connected to the internet. So if you don't have a reliable connection, that can be a problem. And also, just for some reason, sound is always more complicated. So especially if you rely heavily on sound, you want to be absolutely sure that you do a lot of checking to make sure that's going to work. If it doesn't, though, always have a backup plan. Make sure that you don't rely so heavily on a video or on sound that if it didn't work, your presentation is ruined. I've actually seen some people do some nice sort of punting when they weren't able to play a video or sound. Somebody was presenting about a song, the sound didn't work, and she sang for us, and it was a really excellent presentation. So if you have sort of a good backup plan, I think that can work. The other thing is, don't let video or sound take up too much of your presentation time. I'd say the length of a decent movie trailer is probably the maximum that you want to play for anyone. Make sure that you're cutting things down to just the point that you need to make for this presentation.
Definitely. And while talking about practice, just practice with your presentation. In the last video, we talked about looking at other people's presentations and seeing what they do. So that's a good jumping off point for when you're practicing. You can also practice with a projector at home just so you can check those fonts and check those images and make sure that they can come across legibly, so people can see them. Mm-hmm. Also, try and record yourself. If you have no one to practice in front of, just record yourself. You'll learn a lot about yourself and maybe some of the habits you do when presenting. But yeah.
I often find too that if you practice aloud, you might learn something about the words you've been using in your presentation that you didn't realize when you just saw them written. You may realize that saying certain phrases or complicated words maybe require a little bit more practice. Maybe you don't want to say, hermeneutical as many times as you thought in your presentation, or just make sure that it's clear and that you can come across well. I also wanted to say that When you're practicing, you can come to the writing lab to do practice, so don't forget about that. You can email writing@iliff.edu or go to writing.iliff.edu to set up an appointment, and we can go over your presentation together. The main thing is that you want to make sure that the content of your presentation is solid, so that people actually want to see what you have to present. People actually want to hear your presentation. So just make sure you have something good to say, and the rest of it will sort of fall into place.
Definitely.
Great. Well, thanks very much, and thanks for your attention.